All right, so it's recording, but it's not loading. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to, this video is about what we talked about on Thursday. And this video, I think will be really helpful in transitioning from where we were with the age of exploration to where we're going, which is leading up to the Revolutionary War. So I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to my face here because I feel like I'm blocking important things. Okay, so to quickly review, we know that during the age of exploration, Christopher Columbus thought he landed in the Indies, really landed in the Americas, and because he told everyone, hey, just sail west, you'll make it to the Indies, people did, including thinker dude Amerigo Vespucci. And it was Amerigo Vespucci that figured out that the Americas were there, and now our European power countries want to take as much of the Americas as they can. And so what we did was we color-coded the Americas to show what lands Spain claimed, France claimed, Portugal, and England. We did talk about the fact that Italy did not end up claiming any land. And so as you can see, as I color code these things, the different land that the different power countries claimed. And you can see Portugal claimed a little bit of land in South America, and Spain just started taking over. France did end up claiming some land in North America, some in what is now Canada, and some just west of the Appalachian Mountains. But unfortunately, I can't put any yellow on the map yet. I can only put yellow for England on the map when I cross off the in the 1500s in the title, because England doesn't actually start claiming land in the Americas until the early 1600s. But when they do, they will claim 13 little chunks of land right here. Those are the 13 colonies, and it will be those 13 colonies that England claims that will eventually have colonists living in them, colonists that get angrier and angrier and angrier, and eventually declare war on England, the Revolutionary War, in which, ta-da, our country's born. We're not quite there yet, but that is kind of how England came to claim that land, whereas the other power countries claimed other land. So if we're focusing on our country, and I realize that is a sad outline, it looks more like a cow than the United States of America, but you can see that the only power countries that really have to do with the land that will one day be the United States are Spain, France, and England. Portugal doesn't really have anything to do with this part of North America, so we're done kind of talking about Portugal. What we are going to talk about before we dive into England, England will be our main character 100% in the story of our country. But before we talk about England, I do want to talk a little bit about Spain and France, because we know that this land was not empty when they claimed it. We know Native Americans lived here. And so what I want to do real quick in this lesson is talk about how Spain and France each used their new land in the Americas and how they treated the Native Americans in this new land when they came here. So that's what we're going to do. We are going to start by focusing on Spain. Now, Spain claimed all of this land in green, and when they got this new land, they needed to give it a name. They came up with a very creative name, New Spain. Totally uncreative. That would be like me having a child and calling it New Nikki. That's a little ridiculous. Now, New Spain, that land that Spain claimed in the Americas, became one of Spain's colonies. Now, this is a key word. A colony is a settlement or a place ruled by another country. So since Spain is over in Europe, but they rule land somewhere else, that land that they rule is called a colony. Okay, and we did talk about this already, that people who live in a colony are called colonists, and this vocabulary is going to come up. So every so often, I'm going to do a quick review, make sure you're on the right track. We know a blank is a place ruled by another country. Hopefully you're thinking colony. Since New Spain was ruled by Spain's king, it is considered a Spanish colony. So when I say Spanish colony, it's ruled by the King of Spain. If I say English colony, it's ruled by the King of England. If I say French colony, it's ruled by the King of France. Exactly. And we talked, people who live in a colony are called colonists. Now, we know that the King of Spain spent a ton of money to claim all that land in the Americas, and he spent money to make money. And so what the colonists do in New Spain is going to hopefully make the king lots of money. The King of Spain wanted to use his new land to make more money, and he wanted to do it the best he could. So he actually did it in two ways. One, he had noticed with the Native Americans, they had a lot of gold and silver, which meant there must be gold and silver underground in the Americas. And so he decided he was going to mine for gold and silver in his new land. He was also going to use the land itself to make money, and he had a lot of crops growing on huge farms. Huge farms are called plantations, like a small place where you grow something, a garden, a bigger place where you grow something, a farm, a huge farm, we call it a plantation. And on these plantations, Spain grew all sorts of things like sugarcane, tobacco, coffee, cocoa, cotton, and other crops. And the purpose was to grow these crops and then sell them back in Spain and make the King of Spain lots and lots of money. So, what did the colonists do to make money for the King of Spain? They mined for, yep, gold and silver. Good. And they also grew crops on these huge farms called plantations. Awesome. All right. So working in the mines and on the plantations, that's a lot of work. And they needed workers to do that. They needed workers for the mines, workers for the plantations, workers to build their new cities in New Spain. And so they decided to make the local Native Americans their slaves. They were stronger than the Native Americans in terms of weapons. They could force them to do the work. Unfortunately for the Spanish, the Native Americans did not work out as slaves. First, some of the Native Americans fought back from being enslaved and died trying to fight back. Others died of hunger or being overworked. But a good majority of the Native Americans died because their bodies could not handle the germs and the disease that the Europeans brought over. Their bodies weren't equipped. They hadn't become used to the germs of Europe. And so most of the Native Americans actually died of disease that the Europeans exposed them to. So over time, there weren't enough Native Americans left to be slaves. And so the Spanish needed to come up with a new group of people to use as slaves. And they knew right where to turn. They turned to using Africans from Africa. Now, this was an easy decision for the Spanish because people from Europe had been using slaves from Africa for a very, very long time. For hundreds of years, if they needed slaves from Europe, they would send ships down to the coast of Africa. They would kidnap men, women, and children from their villages in Africa and bring them back to Europe and force them to be their slaves. Now, with the Spanish in the Americas, Africa is so very far away. So they were like, well, we've got a closer group here to make our slaves, the Native Americans. Well, as we talked about, that didn't work out because they died out. And so the Spanish had to kind of go to plan B, which was sailing across the ocean, kidnapping men, women, and children from Africa and bringing them back to New Spain to work in the mines and on the plantations. It was this, the Spanish bringing slaves from Africa in this time period, the 1500s, that started African slavery here in the Americas. And unfortunately, that slavery will stay here for hundreds of years. In fact, it will stay here all the way through the Revolutionary War, all the way through the birth of our country, and into the 1800s. In fact, it's the end of the Civil War when slavery finally ends in the United States of America. And that's only about 150 years ago. So who did they use as slaves to work in the mines and on the plantations? Their first attempt that didn't work, the Native Americans. Good. So then they had to turn to their second attempt, which was Africans. So when we talk about how Spain treated Native Americans in their colony of New Spain, we can use this phrase. They murdered the Native Americans. They enslaved the Native Americans. They stole from the Native Americans. Not good treatment. But we're going to turn to France next. Now, France claimed this area here in North America, gave it a name, very clever name, New France. And if you want to decide if France treated them better or worse than the Spanish did, kind of make your prediction. Spain was pretty bad to the Native Americans, so hopefully France was better. And they were. Instead of killing or enslaving the Native Americans, the French decided to trade with the Native Americans. So that's actually much better than killing or enslaving. And trade is when two people have things the other one wants. And the French had many things that the Native Americans wanted: iron tools, iron pots, metal kettles, things that would make the lives of the Native Americans so much easier. But the biggest thing that the French had that the Native Americans wanted was guns. Imagine how guns would change the lives of Native Americans forever in terms of hunting and protection. So the French were using their new lands not to make money necessarily by mining or growing crops, but they traded with the Native Americans. Iron tools, pots, and kettles, but especially guns. But trade goes both ways. So the Native Americans had to have something that the French would want, something that would make the French rich. And believe it or not, it was fur. Fur comes from dead animals. Dead animals come from hunting. There are no bigger experts than the Native Americans as hunters. And so what the French did was they said, listen, we're not going to come and move into your land. We're going to let you stay here. We're going to let you stay here and hunt. And you are going to hunt and you are going to kill those animals in New France. And you are going to trade those fur for the guns and iron tools and pots and kettles. Fur was the status of wealth and importance in Europe. And so people in Europe were buying furs like crazy. And the French had no idea how to hunt, but they knew the Native Americans did. So they let the Native Americans stay in their land and hunt and trade. That fur trade was key. And at first, it was a friendly business relationship. And the two main tribes that they traded with were the Hurons and the Iroquois. And for a while, this was a great positive trade until they decided to get a little bit greedy, the French did. And they kind of used this trade as competition. They would say to the Hurons, hey, how many furs will you give me for this box of guns? And the Hurons would say, how about 5? And then they'd go to the Iroquois and say, well, you know what, Iroquois, the Hurons are willing to give me 5 furs for these guns. How much are you willing to give me? They need to up the offer. So maybe they'd say 10. Well, then the Hurons are told, sorry, the Iroquois are giving us more. You better give us more than that. And over time, the Hurons and the Iroquois had to give more and more and more until finally the French said, it sounds to me like I'm only going to trade with the Iroquois. And the two sides battled, and it weakened both sides. And the French did nothing to stop it. So they were trading fur with the Hurons and the Iroquois, but got a little selfish and greedy. I will certainly say they did not treat the Spanish or treat the Native Americans as poorly as the Spanish, but I can't put a smiley face here. I have to put, I don't know why that won't come there. There we go. Kind of like a sneaky, manipulative face because they tried to take advantage of the Native Americans in that fur trade. Now, we know that eventually in the 1600s, England will start claiming land. Now, at this time period, England and Spain were rivals. They were competitors. And it surprises me that England took as long as they did to start claiming land. If you look, Spain and France were claiming land in the 1500s. England did not claim land in the Americas until the 1600s. And it would take England 127 years to claim just these 13 colonies, these 13 chunks of land in the Americas. Now, the next thing you're going to learn about is the fact that England did try to claim land in the Americas in the 1500s. You can see in 1587, England had their first attempt, their first try to claim land in the Americas. Now, by saying it's a try or an attempt, you can assume correctly that it failed. And England's first attempt to start a colony ended in a mystery that to this day has still never been solved. And that mystery is called the Lost Colony of Roanoke. And that will be what you will watch the next 2 videos about. If I can stop.